Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, after those 2 days of talks in Moscow that concluded on a very high note between Afghanistan opposition party leaders and the Taliban, what we see underway is the preparation for the February 25th talks that will be held in Doha between the U.S. and the Taliban. But on the other hand, the situation in Afghanistan doesn't reflect the success of all stakeholders here as these talks are developing, because the Pentagon has stepped up airstrikes and special operation raids in Afghanistan to the highest level since we've seen since 2014. And the Defense Department officials are describing these as coordinated series of attacks on Taliban leaders and fighters. Now, the Afghan president, President Ghani, who has been frozen out of these talks so far, has offered the Taliban a possibility of an office in Afghanistan, but the Taliban have declined all such efforts. Let's talk to our guests on how they're seeing these developments and what does this mean for the future of these US-Taliban talks and the other regional stakeholders involved. First of all, I would like to welcome our guest who's joining us from London. He's a political analyst and a university lecturer, Mr. Muslim Shirzad. And also another political analyst will be joining us here from Islamabad. I would like to welcome Ms. Amina Khan on the phone. Welcome to Newswire. So, Mr. Shirzad, let me start with you. How do you see these developments? What was your conclusion of the talks that took place in Moscow and now that we are headed towards the February 25th talks in Doha?
Thanks for having me. Well, indeed, nowadays ongoing issues in the circle of the peace negotiations, we can say there's new developments. And as you know, Mr. Khalizad is also going now to Brussels, Berlin, Doha, Kabul, and Islamabad too. So it is something that new, and I believe that these initiatives will pave the way to the next round of talks, which will be going on with the US and the Taliban in Doha on 25th of February. And after that, there will be another session between the political parties and also Taliban and also maybe Afghan government in Doha. So these are the new developments which we can see cautiously in a very optimistic manner.
We can see it in an optimistic manner. Let me come to you now, Ms. Amna. We're talking about the conditions been put forth by the U.S. that have been put by the Taliban, and neither party has really compromised on any of their stances, on any of their conditions since day one. What we're really seeing is nothing concrete happening. There was some rumor that there would be a timeline on the sidelines of the Moscow talks. In fact, one of the deputy speaker, or the deputy spokesman of the Qatar office of the Taliban actually came out and said, well, the U.S. has agreed to withdraw by half their troops by end of April. But again, the U.S. came out and saying that, no, there's no such agreement. There is a lot of confusion. Do you see any kind of trend emerging here? Are you hopeful about these talks as we expect to see more on the end of Feb?
Well, first of all, let me begin by saying that, the Moscow talks were not really regarding the peace process between the U.S. and the Afghan Taliban. This was more of an intra-Afghan, dialogue where the Taliban wanted to express their views on a platform with other political factions and figures within Afghanistan, which the Taliban have been claiming to have relations with. So I don't think we need to, of course, the Moscow format is a very important development, but I think, we don't need to mix the two processes up. And I think, in fact, one of the biggest problems to the peace process now is the multiplicity of so many processes going on, because they are contradictory, they are causing issues, as we've seen within Kabul, because Kabul hasn't been very open about them. They've been very pessimistic, they've been critical. The point is that, again, please, I think everyone needs to understand that this is a conflict that has been going on for 17 years. And the talks that are taking place right now are at the pre-nascent stage, I would like to say. Still, things are being talked upon, they're being negotiated, the process is long, it's complex, and yes, both sides will need to eventually come to some sort of a compromise. And the Taliban, of course, have been adamant. They say that one of the main principles of the peace process has to be the withdrawal of foreign forces. And I personally feel that both the Americans and the Taliban have come to some sort of a compromise, but they're not speaking about it right now. They're not disclosing it because, of course, there would be havoc. Already Kabul is up in arms. They're not really forthcoming when it comes to the peace process. And I think, again, one of the biggest issues is, the national reconciliation, that is still not there in Afghanistan. The national divide is so huge. So I think right now, it's just a very, very complex situation. And I think, again, one has to be extremely patient.
Right. It's too early maybe to comment on where this could be headed. But it does seem that after the U.S. initiated, or the Taliban, with talks with the Taliban, that it did kind of sort of start some kind of development, in the sense that there are major players coming out to speak, like the inter-Afghan talks in Moscow that you clarified. I mean, it does seem to have triggered some kind of process. But at the same time, there is a big concern that negotiating with the Taliban, how can Taliban have changed so drastically, because the concern for women's rights has been a major issue that is being voiced. And here I just want to play a small video clip of the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, what she said recently.
We are hoping, and this is why we are hoping that the negotiations will result in fruitful results. The Afghan government was the first, based on the people's demand and wishes, to roll out a peace proposal for the very first time last February. And the rights of women, I believe, is not a negotiable factor. It has to be there, it has to be preserved.
Do you agree? Do you agree with what she was saying, Roya Rouhani, that there would be no compromise on women's rights? Do you think that is a non-negotiable issue, like she has mentioned?
Of course, of course. Look, let me just tell you, and again, please, I'm not an apologist for the Afghan Taliban, but, I think we need to look at the larger picture over here. For example, violence against women has increased tenfold during, the so-called period of democracy in Afghanistan. So to say that violence against women or the suppression of rights against women, it's not just limited to the Taliban rule at all, number one. Number two, of course, a fair amount of suspicion does come when it comes to the Afghan Taliban. They cannot be trusted simply because of their previous policies towards women. But the fact that, if we see when the ceasefire took place during the past, last year, there were 3 days. Women interacted with the Afghan Taliban. Women questioned them and said that, you can no longer use violence as a means to achieve your political means. Similarly, you have seen women interact with the Afghan Taliban on a number of track 2 talks, initiatives, and you had, for example, members like Fawzia Kufi, who were in the Moscow format and again made it very clear that women's rights will not be compromised. Now, when we come to the Afghan Taliban, they also know that they cannot operate the way they used to, say, a decade ago. Afghanistan, not only women, but the Afghan society has evolved despite the violence. Afghanistan is a different ballgame now altogether. People will never accept the Taliban and the rule that they had a decade ago. And I think the Afghan Taliban are very conscious and wary of that. And that is why you see now statements coming from the Afghan Taliban, where they talk about human rights, they talk about nationhood, they talk about the role of women, and they say that, women are entitled to work, they're allowed to choose their future spouse, they're allowed to inheritance, and they've even said that, we will even accept a female prime minister, but not a president, because of the constitution. And again, so my point is that while these positive things are coming out from the Afghan Taliban, yes, I understand that women have this fear, but the only way to see whether the Afghan Taliban have changed or not is for them to have some sort of power in the future of Afghanistan. And also there will be a lot of checks and balances, because I think, the Afghan Taliban can never come into power the way they were, say, a decade ago. If anything happens, it's going to be some sort of a power-sharing setup, and women will definitely have a role. So I think the fear is there, but I think they should, women also need to know that the Afghan Taliban cannot operate the way they used to. And I think the women of Afghanistan today have a much louder voice. They're more stronger. They're in parliament. So the fear is there, but I think that they don't need to be as pessimistic, as is being portrayed.
Okay. And Mr. Muslim, let me pull you into this conversation as we discuss what the women will be in whatever future setup that Afghanistan will have. Of course, Taliban will be a crucial part of that. Let's also talk a little about the current Afghan government. They have been frozen out of the docks completely. The President Ghani came out and said that he would like to offer a possibility of opening an office in Afghanistan to the Taliban, and they declined. What do you think is the reason that he offered 3 specific places? He mentioned Kabul, Nangarhar, and one other place. What do you think is the significance associated with these 3 places?
Well, first of all, that's very clearly that if we talk about the format or going on issues in Doha, we should know that without the green light of United States, it was not possible. So it is very clear. The second issue is, for sure, the Taliban also know, and also the Afghan people know, that going to the 1994 or 1996 is impossible. Now we have vibrant media in Afghanistan. Now there is a young generation, educated people, and there are lots of changes after 9/11. So this is one issue. The other issue, when you said about the Afghan government, regretfully, the Afghan government, especially President Ghani, is seeing himself isolated from these issues. And that is why that in every issue, there is blame on Pakistan in these days, or there is very cautiously in the United States, because President Ghani see that or imagine that Pakistan should force the Taliban to come to the table with the Afghan government, and President Ghani should lead that. And also the other issues about the United States, there is also about the speculations, despite that the Zalmay Khalilzad rejected, that there will be a power sharing and there will be a new government and there will be a kind of interim government. So in this case, President Ghani, in one side, is telling about the press of Taliban and killing of those fighters that they arms. But on the other side, when he is going to the Nangarhar, he offers office in Nangarhar, one of the strongholds of the Taliban period, and also the Kandahar, the rising place of the Taliban, and also Kabul as the capital of the Afghanistan. So these issues has caused that there will be no one's voice from the Afghan capital, especially from the President Ghani.
Right. Let me ask you, Ms. Amna, what do you think is the significance between Kabul, Kandahar, and Nangarhar, which he offered President Ghani as possible places where the Taliban can hold office? And also, why did the Taliban decline? What is the significance of the Doha office, where their political office is, that the Taliban want the world to recognize?
First of all, sorry, I just wanted to add to what he was saying. First of all, I think, sidelining at this particular time, I understand the pressures that are on President Ghani, and I think it is important that any peace deal that takes place has to include Kabul. There will be no peace deal unless and until Kabul is not on board. And while I understand President Ghani's pressures internally, I think this is something that really needs to be looked into. The Taliban keep on saying that, they don't want to, that they want to negotiate with the Americans first. And however, they have mentioned that they will negotiate with Kabul, but at a much later time when they've reached a peace agreement. Now, why is this? The factor is that they do not trust the administration in Kabul. This is not just limited to President Ghani. It was the same case with President Hamid Karzai as well. They feel that because, the narrative is that it's an installed puppet government, and at the end of the day, any decision that is meant to be taken will be taken in Washington. Let me just mention that when President Ghani, I think he's the first president and the first leader that presented an unprecedented peace deal to the Afghan Taliban last year. And it addressed all those concerns that the Taliban have been fighting for, whether it was the constitution, recognition as a political faction, the opening of an office, setting their prisoners free, and even he said that he was willing to negotiate on the constitution. However, the Afghan Taliban, why did they not accept that peace process? Because, and they have said it and they're on record, that they feel that President Ghani cannot deliver. So one of the greatest issues between the two countries is the trust, the level of mistrust, and also the fact that President Ghani cannot deliver. And the fact that President Ghani, by his own admission, says that, he is completely dependent on the Americans, whether it's aid or whether it's him even being in politics. So this is one of the main reasons.
It's
And
interesting
number two,
you... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead if you wanted to.
Just to add to that, interesting that you mentioned that President Ghani himself has admitted, because it reminds me of this interview that he did with 60 Minutes, I believe, where he categorically mentioned that if the U.S. forces were to withdraw, the Afghan security forces would not be able to sustain it. The onslaught, that is, of course, he's referring to from not just the Taliban but other factions. So it does again bring into question that how prepared is President Ghani's government to face any kind of U.S. withdrawal. Of course, that is to assume that the withdrawal will take place in the timeline, or the assumed timeline, that by the end of these peace talks something will emerge.
No, I agree. Look, the issue is that it is very difficult for the government in Afghanistan to operate on its own. They don't have an economy. The country has been in turmoil. And the EU, to be very honest, the Europeans are only in it because of the pressure of the Americans. So the day the Americans completely withdraw or stop their support, one doesn't want to see the repetition of the past of what the state of Afghanistan was in. However, again, if you see even the peace process and the fact that it's picked up, it has only picked up because the Americans accepted the Taliban's demand to direct negotiations. Otherwise, if it was only left to the peace process that was initiated by President Ghani, it would have been at a standstill. So the fact that the Americans have realized that the only way to peace is through negotiations and speaking to the Afghan Taliban is the fact that, the position that, Kabul is in today, where some sort of progress is being made. And also coming to the places where President Ghani has mentioned, primarily because these are strongholds of the Taliban, they're Pashtun provinces. So I think just to give them that, thing that this is your area and you'll be able to operate here. But I think, again, the fact is that the Afghan Taliban do not trust President Ghani, and they feel that being in Doha, they have a larger international audience. So I do not think that they're going to accept this offer and come back to accepting President Ghani's offer, whether it's in 3 provinces or 2 provinces.
Okay. And here I'd like to welcome a guest who is joining us, Mr. Rustam Shah Mohmand, the former ambassador to Afghanistan. We're talking about the peace talks and how they evolve and what this means for the future of Afghanistan. But here, something that really struck a chord is the recent development that the Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid said that they refer Pakistan as a brother. They acknowledge their involvement in the talks and their contribution in the talks, and also mentioning that this was a Taliban initiative, like sort of almost taking credit that this is something that we had started. Here I want to ask you 2 questions. Essentially, one, Pakistan's role, as there is a lot of criticism, especially from India coming in, that Pakistan has a greater influence on the Taliban than what is portrayed. What is your take on this, and could you clear some of these misconceptions about Pakistan's influence versus role in trying to support the peace talks?
Well, this is a rather complex situation. On the one hand, Pakistan does not have much influence. On the other hand, there are deep suspicions amongst the Taliban against Pakistan for a host of reasons. Then there are Taliban detainees here in Pakistan. Mullah Baradar was released after 8 years on the intervention of the Americans. So Pakistan had a role as far as the Abu Dhabi talks are concerned. But the Taliban and the Americans have been interacting directly with each other much before the present government took office. They have been in contact for the last 2 or 3 years, directly and indirectly. And in July of last year, they started formal interaction and negotiations began, and that continues to this day. So Pakistan had no role in the initial context of Taliban with the Americans. But of course, Pakistan being an important country in the context of Afghanistan will continue to have some role in future.
We've seen the Trump administration, we've seen President Trump himself write a letter to Prime Minister Imran Khan asking him to step up efforts in helping in achieving these peace talks, much before these peace talks even came into fruition. But what are we to assume from that? We see this U.S. Special Envoy continuously visiting Islamabad, Zalmi Khalilzad, also acknowledging Pakistan's role. We've seen Sabiullah Mujahid come out yesterday and say that the Pakistan's played they have a significant contribution towards these peace talks. What are we to make of these?
Well, the Taliban spokesman, I think, have made his position clear. He said that Pakistan is a brotherly country. We would have very, very warm, friendly relations with Pakistan. Pakistan paid host to so many refugees, and Pakistan supported the Afghans in the fight against the Soviet Union in 1979 and onwards. But he also insisted that Pakistan has no role in the present interaction between the Taliban and the Americans. And I think from the information that we have, that is absolutely true. But I think let's go beyond this. Whether Pakistan had a marginal role or more significant role, let's try to project into the future. Let's let's try to visualize an Afghanistan from which the foreign forces have departed, and the Afghans have to evolve, work out their own governance systems. So what will be the constitution? How would the governance systems be formulated? How would the Taliban be mainstreamed? What will be the composition of the interim government? What will be its mandate? What will be its duration? And who would head the interim government? So these are, I think, more important questions. And what will be the role of the Afghan government? Because the Afghan government wants reconciliation, but they want it on their own terms, which are not acceptable to the Taliban. So how to handle that situation, that's very tricky. And then would the Taliban agree to a ceasefire? From the information that we have, they will not agree to a ceasefire as long as the American forces or the foreign forces are on their side. That will take time. So I think these are very troubling questions, and formidable obstacles remain. So I think Pakistan, China, Iran have a role in that. Pakistan has a very significant role, but China also has a role, because China, Russia, and Iran in the last 2 years have been trying to develop closer and closer relations with Taliban for a number of reasons.
Right. Thank you so much for your contribution. There's still a lot of confusion on how this is going to progress. Some very, very important key question Mr. Rustam has put forth here. What exactly will be in the absence of the U.S. forces? But there is the main confusion. At the same time, Colonel Butler came out and said, well, we're not withdrawing as yet. And here I would actually like to play a video clip that also sort of reflects in the U.S. envoy Zalmi Khalilzad's statement regarding the withdrawal. Let's just take a quick listen.
My overall goal is, at the direction of the President and the Secretary of State, not to seek a withdrawal agreement, but a peace agreement. We have reached an agreement in principle with the Taliban on a framework that would provide guarantees, an enforcement mechanism. Nothing is agreed to until everything has been agreed to. And the other issues that must be dealt with are issues of a roadmap for Afghanistan's political future to end the Afghan war. So the time has come, they say, for an inclusive dialogue leading to an inclusive peace.
So you heard his statement, and then also just recently we've heard the U.S. forces in Afghanistan spokesman Colonel David say that that we will continue the support for the Afghan counterparts to thwart threats against Afghanistan and the United States, and there is no plan either to withdraw or reduce the number of U.S. forces. What do you make of this? Is this something that is just on the as a pretense, or do you feel that there is really no clarity on parts of U.S. policy on the withdrawal?
My personal understanding from all this is, and through my conversations with different people on both sides, is that, look, the fact is that there are only 14,000 troops in Afghanistan, which is not such a huge number if you compare it to what they were, say, back in before the actual withdrawal took place. So I personally feel that I think a drawdown is going to take place, which is completely different from a withdrawal. And the drawdown will take place in the sense that, it'll happen maybe in 2 batches, where President Trump will be able to tell the American people that, look, I won the war, and hence, try and get votes for re-election. And similarly, it will also be face-saving for the Afghan Taliban, who will be able to tell its fighters that you've been shedding blood on the ground, but look, we were able to force the Americans out. But once some sort of a power-sharing agreement is formed, I'm sure it will be very patchy and, it's still debatable as into what the future political system will be. But of course, if it has the Afghan Taliban, then for sure the Americans are going to come back, but their role will be different.
They will come under the. And with that, we've unfortunately run out of time here. We've got to rush. And with that, I just want to quickly add to that. Did Colonel David, who the U.S. forces spokesman for Afghanistan, did categorically say that no reduction of U.S. forces on the ground will take place, not as yet anyway. But we'll see how the story evolves and keep you up to date. Right now, we have to take a quick short break. With that, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. Now, the top U.S. commander in the war against ISIS aligned himself on Sunday with the U.S. intelligence community assessment that there are tens of thousands of ISIS fighters that are spread across Syria and Iraq. Now, this does come at a time right after President Trump said, while addressing the members of the global coalition to defeat the Islamic State group, who were meeting in Washington on the 6th of February, and he said, and I quote, "It should be formally announced probably sometime next week that we will have 100% of the caliphate." Not quite, it seems, as reports that were issued last year that estimated that the group had still between 20,000 to 30,000 ISIS fighters just in Iraq and Syria continue to circulate today as verifiable pieces of information, and thousands of fighters are still known to be there. Votel says that the fighters are believed to be dispersed in large swathes of the desert in Syria, and that while U.S. troop withdrawal was definite, but there was still no timeline confirmed. Now, to understand better what the situation is, as the last retreat of the ISIS fighters is believed to be taking place from the place where they originated from in Syria, let me first welcome our guests and to just get their take on how they see these developments. First of all, from Istanbul, we have Mr. Omer Ozkizilicik. He's a political analyst. And also joining us is Mr. Yusuf Soner, also from Istanbul, a political analyst. Mr. Omer, how do you see this last retreat? Do you feel that this could be detrimental at all in eliminating what is still known to be a significant number of ISIS fighters in Syria?
So first of all, the Syrian Democratic Force led by the YPG announced the last operation to eliminate the last remaining ISIS pocket in Syria almost a year ago. And they repeated this declaration several times, and this is the last time they repeated it. Actually, if we look to the ground and what's happening there, we see that now ISIS is being besieged in the Bahus pocket, which is near the Iraqi border. But actually, the area was captured by the YPG several times and lost again to ISIS. So we see that there's a small number of ISIS fighters who put up a fierce resistance. And since a year, the YPG has not made the final push to eliminate ISIS terrorist presence in this small pocket from Hajin to the Iraqi border. However, what's going on now on the ground is quite interesting, because ISIS members tried to negotiate evacuation from this pocket to the Iraqi desert, and this negotiations actually went well, and the YPG accepted their demand to let them go to the Iraqi desert. However, the US military person on the ground stopped this agreement to be implemented on the ground. So the US, which rejected to allow the ISIS members to be evacuated to the Iraqi desert, have put up the airstrikes, increased the number of the airstrikes, and they are now trying to eliminate the last remaining ISIS presence there. About the numbers, actually, the ISIS numbers in the pocket are not much. They are less than 600. However, as it's a small pocket and it's a first resistance there, and the ISIS members have nowhere to leave, the fighting is going on. And also in regards to the motivation, the Iraqi border, near to the Iraqi border, ISIS is using the triangle between Iraq, the Assad regime, and the YPG-controlled areas to survive. And what we are now seeing is that the US wants to eliminate them before going out of Syria, actually. And this time, as it seems, they will achieve their goal. And we might see a defeat of territorial ISIS presence inside Syria. However, This does not mean that ISIS is being eliminated entirely and the enduring defeat of ISIS is achieved, because we know that in Iraq, in Syria, ISIS cells are conducting many terrorist attacks, and they have many cells operating in these areas. And to defeat ISIS, the root cause of this terrorist organization have to be addressed and eliminated, which is not done yet by the YPG or even by the Iraqi government. And the only success story we have in regards to ISIS cells are actually in northern Aleppo. For example, in Al-Bab, which is the neighbor city of Manbij, there are almost no ISIS terrorist attacks and almost no ISIS cells. However, in the neighboring Manbij, we have ISIS terror attacks almost every week. So this sharp contrast between both sides shows us that if there's a great local governance, if the root cause of ISIS are being addressed, if the people in the area are living in stability and safety and have economic opportunities, ISIS will not find the ground to re-emerge and conduct terrorist attacks.
Right. Now, Mr. Soner, the U.S. Did make a surprise announcement on troop withdrawal, but now as their stance is changing slowly, we could interpret in a way that while they do still talk about troop withdrawal, they say there is no timeline confirmed. Now, how do you see this reflects on the biggest challenge that is defeating ISIS? The area that Mr. Omer is referring to is understood to be 1 square mile, I believe, a very small area housing about 600 fighters trying to get away from there, and the firefight is going strong. Do you believe that the ideology of ISIS is the biggest issue, that is what everyone is struggling to eliminate, and can it even be eliminated? And it's no longer a question about numbers here.
We don't think that ISIS constitutes an ideological problem, or we don't think that ISIS really has a popular base in Syria anymore. ISIS has become an excuse. It has become an excuse for those forces within the state, within the United States intelligence community and state apparatus to protect the PYD, or it has become the excuse for other forces to install their friendly local governments inside Syria. So we don't think that ISIS poses a real ideological or military threat, but it has turned clearly to what it was from the beginning, a tool in the hand of foreign governments trying to destabilize Syria. So the correct answer to this problem is the regional government's security cooperation to eliminate ISIS and the regional government's security cooperation against foreign intelligence services to terminate the threat of local terror activities connected to so-called ISIS elements. But we don't think that ISIS ideology or ISIS popular base is still existing. This threat has been eliminated, and it has been eliminated mainly by the Syrian government and its cooperating forces in the region like Iran, Russia, and also Turkey.
Right. And here I'd like to welcome an article analyst also joining us from Istanbul, Mr. Yusuf Erim. Welcome to Newswire. We're talking about ISIS as an ideology. Is it possible to eliminate them as SDF? With the US-led coalition has started another last assault since Saturday on the last pocket left in Syria of where the ISIS stronghold began from. Is this something that you believe can be eliminated, or do you agree with Mr. Soner, who doesn't think that this is an ideology is not the problem here, it is more of a proxy war that's taking place?
Yes and no. It is a proxy war that's taking place, and many people, as Mr. Soner stated, are using ISIS as an excuse. But how effective has the fight been against ISIS now? Militarily, okay, it's been effective up to a certain point, but ISIS as a military problem now is almost solved. Hence, now phase 2, the actual important part, preventing an ISIS revival, will be based on strong local governance. And from what we've seen so far, the SDF or the YPG, whatever you want to call them, have been very weak when it comes to local governance. We can see this in Raqqa, we can see this in Deir Zor, we can see it in any region that they control that's a majority Sunni Arab area, and they're having serious problems governing. And when you can't keep the citizens happy, you open the dissent, you open the door for disgruntled people, and this power vacuum is unfortunately filled by extremists like ISIS.
A power vacuum that is filled with extremists. We're going to come back to you, Mr. Erim. We just have a slight audio problem. Mr. Omar, let me pose this back to you. There's a huge difference of opinion here. How do you see this not being when it comes to the power vacuum in itself? Can we see that after the U.S. withdrawal that this can be redressed?
So actually, we have to look to the ISIS strategy and what they are trying to do. In Iraq, even before ISIS was officially declared as a Khilafah, they have put a strategy to eliminate any alternative for them. They tried actually explicitly to target Sunni Arabs who might become an alternative for the Sunni Arab population. And by doing so, they have presented themselves as the only alternative for the Sunni Arab population inside Iraq, which enabled them to gain an important popular support in Iraq. But however, in Syria, the situation is different. As we know, since its peak in Syria and Iraq, ISIS members inside Syria were mostly foreigners, and they have been less popular support in Syria than in Iraq. Actually, this is mainly thanks to the Syrian opposition, which successes in gaining the popular support and presenting itself as an alternative to ISIS and for the Sunni Arab population of Syria. So it's really important to have political alternatives which can represent people. We know that the Assad regime has alienated the Syrian civil society, and the Iranian Shia militias in the region are a main source of argumentation for ISIS to re-emerge, and also the Kurdish Marxist YPG is a good reason and argument for ISIS to gain popular support. And what we need here is strong local governance and representation of the Sunni Arab population in politics, in governance, and in the future government of Syria. If we cannot achieve this, ISIS will find a good ground to re-emerge. And also not only ISIS, but other terrorist organizations and radical jihadist organizations like Hayat Tahrir Sham may use this environment to re-emerge and conduct terrorist attacks.
Another concern, Mr. Erim, let me ask you this. Another concern is that the fighters of the ISIS fighters are mostly foreigners, and so whenever there is U.S. pressure that increases, we see them disperse, and which is one of the reasons why we've continuously see them regroup in different areas. Do you see that this power vacuum will be a main reason, or may possibly be the reason why they might re-emerge in Syria and continue to cause havoc?
The vacuum is permitted to establish, then yes, ISIS will try to, not just only ISIS, any terror organization will try to take advantage of the opportunity. So it's very, very important that the U.S., as it's withdrawing, it highly coordinates with its allies that can fill the power vacuum and provide local governance to prevent anything like this from happening. And frankly, right now, when you look at the list of U.S. allies who are capable of doing this, the only U.S. ally that is capable of providing strong governance, also security on the ground, also who has very good relations with local groups, especially the Sunni Arab groups, is Turkey. There obviously isn't any plans to hand this land back over to the regime at the moment in the U.S. foreign policy playbook. So somebody has to take care of this area. You cannot relieve it as a power vacuum. The SDF does not have the ability to locally govern this. So if the United States is really serious about ending ISIS, if they're serious about preventing a revival of ISIS, then there needs to be some which way, shape, or form where they can get Turkey involved in this. And Turkey will need to provide the strong local governance that they provided in Al-Bab and Jarablus as well. Now, I don't want to pull this issue to a Turkish standpoint too much, but right now this is the only solution, because the SDF is not cutting it in Raqqa, they're not cutting it in Deir ez-Zor, and the problem's only going to get worse as it goes on. And ISIS revival will have ruined 4 years worth of work.
4 years worth of work is on the line here. And here, Mr. Let me bring you into this conversation and ask you, do you have confidence in how Turkey could address this issue, especially considering that there is an ongoing debate on the buffer zone going on, the security zone that they want to establish, and they're really sort of been at loggerheads with the US on how to establish this?
I would like to remind the other contributors that we are talking about the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. So if there is someone to fill the so-called power vacuum here, then it is, number one, is the responsible state, the responsible government, which is the Syrian Arab Republic and its government. And Turkey's role is to assist in this operation, fighting against local cells, local remnants of ISIS or other terror groups, which are correctly aimed at by Turkey. And we also see some steps towards that. Unconfirmed reports tell that in the past month of December, the chairman of the Syrian National Security Council, Mr. Ali Memluk, has visited Turkey, the city of Antalya, to engage in talks with the Turkish security apparatus and intelligence members. Again, these are unconfirmed reports, but the president of Turkey, Mr. Tayyip Erdogan, has confirmed for himself that, of course, despite political differences, there will be contact between intelligence services of the two countries of Turkey and Syria. So once again, the solution for the ISIS problem is not building those local councils or those local governance institutions which the US and Israel has been dreaming of. They have been dreaming of them as a Kurdish, so-called Kurdish entities. But the solution to ISIS and the general terror problem is the cooperation between Turkey and Syria and their intelligence services as well as their armed forces. And this is the road that we are traveling on, despite all the arguments that are presented from the American side and taken up by some other local experts as well.
All right, and here, Mr. Omar, since we're running out of time, we could quickly take on this. Do you agree with what Mr. Soner has said? And also, what do you see as the future of ISIS now coming to a close finally? We're talking about 500, 600 jihadists left in this final fight to eliminate, excuse me, their stronghold.
So it would be wrong to assume that the Assad regime, who caused the ISIS presence in Syria in the first place, will eliminate the ISIS presence now and ensure that they will not re-emerge. Because we should not forget, if Syria is now in the position it's currently, it's mainly because of the Assad regime itself. So if we assume that the cause for a terrorist organization in Syria will also be the solution, this is quite ridiculous. And if we look also to Iraq, where the Iraqi government has been established and gained control over all of the territories, we see that ISIS conducts many terrorist attacks and they have many cells because the Iraqi government has not achieved to represent the Sunni Arab population in its fully. And the same will also happen if we do what Mr. Soner said and the Assad regime will gain control over these areas. What we need for Syria is a government which represents the Syrian people and not a minority. It's not an ethnic, religious minority-led so-called government. And additionally, we are speaking about Syria, and we should not forget the Syrian people themselves. If we look to the local people in these areas, to the tribes and to the genuine people, they do not want the Assad regime. They do not want to be ruled by an Iranian proxy. They do not want to be ruled by a Kurdish Marxist organization, the YPG. They want to rule themselves. And this is their right to do so. And Turkey has to support this also for its own sake and also for its own security. The refugees in Turkey will not return to an Assad-ruled country. They said it, and this has been a major opinion within the entire Syrian refugee population in Turkey. If Turkey wants to accelerate the return of refugees, there needs to be local governance and there needs to be a political change in Syria.
Okay, and Mr. Soner, do you agree with him there? And also, what does it mean? Does it mean that the ISIS will be now displaced in other areas of conflict, which is ideally where they show up? Any place where there is chaos, where we're getting reports on Afghanistan is where their presence is increasing. How do you take this transition?
This transition is not a surprise because let me first answer 2 points. To blame the Assad government of being responsible of the resurgence of or the existence of ISIS takes ISIS as a popular ideological movement of some citizens unhappy with their government. Well, this is not the truth about ISIS. And this is not the truth about ISIS is again confirmed exactly by what you refer to, that ISIS re-emerges in Afghanistan or in other countries, in China as well. ISIS elements re-emerge because this is not a popular movement. This is not a movement that criticizes some kind of government or some kind of ideology. This is a movement which is basically led by foreign intelligence services, let's name it the CIA, actively finances and organizes ISIS. And there are people contributing to that movement for their own reasons. But this movement is not a movement that is caused by the Assad government. It is a movement, an intelligence-led movement that was fought against by the Syrian government successfully, very successfully. And Turkey has no role. Again, I here disagree. There might be local communities in Syria which criticize the government, which criticize, for example, the Iranian influence in the government. Maybe there might be some cities or local populations that criticize the Syrian government's cooperation with Russia as well. But it is not Turkey's role to be voice of these internal oppositions to the Syrian government in Damascus. This is not our country's role. Our country's role is to fight against the terror movement and its political entities in Syria and to safeguard our own security. And in that context, we will cooperate with Syria. And in that context, this cooperation will include as well cooperation with China, Pakistan, Russia, and other Asian countries, because ISIS is a threat against all the Asian countries, and it's a threat used by the United States of America. It's not a popular movement.
Right, and here, Mr. Erim, let me just quickly bring you in for your final remarks on this comment. Also, there's a lot that Mr. Soner has said, which I wish you could comment on all of it, especially on the take on that this is a U.S. cultivated movement, the ISIS itself. While this comment comes in, we've also known that the military over there has continued to look for ways to put pressure on ISIS, and they keep re-emerging, and they want to support the SDF without ground troops as they're planning their withdrawal. How do you think this will ever be possible, in your opinion? And could you expand a little on also the ISIS's re-emergence in other regions of conflict?
Now, first thing with what Mr. Soner said, in a perfect world, yes, Syria, the Syrian government, the Assad regime would take care of its own internal security. But again, in a perfect world, there wouldn't have been a 9-year conflict, which has dragged in so many countries and evolved into the mess that it is in today. Obviously, Syria cannot provide its own security. If Turkey felt confident in this, it would have enforced the Adana Agreement, as Russian President Vladimir Putin stated the last time Erdogan and Putin met together. So obviously Turkey doesn't feel confident that Assad can provide security for Turkey. It doesn't feel confident that its national security is going to be protected. So it must step in. And it doesn't look like it's going to be the Adana Agreement. It looks like it's going to be a safe zone from what President Erdogan has been talking about lately. Now, as for the SDF, I stated this before, their continued presence is not necessary anymore. They have not been able to provide local governance. And if it continues the way it is in the current political conjecture, yes, an ISIS revival will happen. Now, who's ISIS controlled by? I don't want to get into that too much. That's a borderline conspiracy theory saying it's the Americans or this or that. And there's no ironclad proof, and I don't want to talk about anything if there's no ironclad proof in it. But we do see that the SDF has freed ISIS fighters before. We do see that they have sold oil through the Qatarji group before, as the Wall Street Journal stated in their report today. So there is some type of links there, but like I said, there is no ironclad proof. As for their emergence in other countries, well, anytime there's a security vacuum, you guys were speaking about Afghanistan before. We're seeing right now the international community get closer and closer to the Taliban, while there is a elected and legitimate Afghan government in place.
Okay.
Now, when you
Thank you so much, Mr. Yusuf Erim. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank all our guests, Mr. Yunus Soner and Mr. Omer, all of the political analysts for joining us from Istanbul. With that, we've come to the end of our show. We'll keep you updated as the news evolves on Syria and on Afghanistan. Keep watching Indus News. See you next time.